We're a nonprofit organization dedicated to eradicating human slavery, human trafficking, child exploitation, and child sexual abuse material through disrupting networks and applying data technology and advanced analytics and intelligence.
Hello and welcome. My name is Gabriella Cruz and I'm the head of strategy here at Blockfills. Today, I'm going to be discussing with my fellow panelists the very important topic of cryptocurrency and child sex abuse materials, the intersection between these two issue areas, and how and in what way we as an industry can move forward together constructively. Just as a bit of an introduction to myself, and then I'll pass it around to my other colleagues. I have had and worked for a number of years in international economic and financial sector development, working significantly in emerging and developing economies and supporting transparency and accountability on a number of issue areas, specifically corporate governance and financial reporting. To me, this issue is extremely important, not only because I'm a mother and have my own children, but also because I think there's an important piece of an industry's responsibility to try to steward good behavior, ethical behavior, and also social protections through some of its engagement with the wider sphere. With that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to my colleague Lauren to introduce herself, and then over to Luke. Lauren?
Hi, my name is Lauren Benjamin. I am the Deputy CCO and BSA AML Officer for Kraken's US operating entity. My background is I have a graduate degree in terrorism financing studies, or terrorism studies with a focus on terrorism financing and its nexus with transnational criminal organizations and money laundering organizations, which sort of led me into the formal financial world. Prior to joining crypto and Kraken, I was in banking and in both investigations and then in policy and program and governance development within the bank.
Excellent.
Yep. I'm Luke Wilson. I am the head of public sector for Allium Labs. My background is mostly in investigations and analytics within the Department of Defense and the FBI. I've spent about 10 years in the FBI and another 9 years with the Department of Defense. Thank you.
So I think before we kind of get started, I'll pass it over to Lauren first. You know, before we usually dive into some of these subjects, I like to ask people their personal why and then what they believe the industry why should be. There's a lot of issues that are pressing at the intersection of cryptocurrency and some of the broader social issues. What is it both for yourself personally and then as an industry, why should we care?
Well, on a personal level, similar to you, I'm a mother of 3 daughters, and it's not only terrifying, but incredibly important to prepare our daughters for the future, prepare our children to be able to ensure that we have the protections out there and the awareness of what is truly happening in the world so that we can protect against it and fight against it. On a professional level, I think I was first introduced into sort of human trafficking and CSAM related investigations in the FIU very early in my career when I joined banking. And we were conducting an investigation that involved multiple Bay Area massage parlors that we identified as a human trafficking ring. They alerted for structuring related transaction monitoring as well as high dollar value transactions. We did full OSINT related investigations and we dug into it and found that they had been advertising on backpage.com. I don't know if you remember that old site. It has been since closed down by the feds, thank goodness, but it was pretty wide spanning with regards to how they were gathering individuals and sort of catching people to become involved in human trafficking rings, as well as advertising for sexual related services that were, illicit, exactly what we were trying to combat against within the financial sector. And we worked closely with law enforcement following that investigation, and it it struck me as exactly why I got into the business, was to combat against bad actors working in a field. I said my background was in terrorism financing, and when I first came into the world, everybody was a bad actor, and you went diving and looking into it. I had wanted to go into government and went private sector instead. So this was sort of my way to be able to really do good on the private sector side because of how it very obviously affected everybody across the board, not just on a global sphere, but on a very local sphere. And then now in crypto, you see that it presents itself slightly differently. And the victims that you find, at least more often, tend to be even the more vulnerable in cryptocurrency related cases, because you're looking at smaller dollar transactions, you're looking at more child sexual exploitation material, and it's more heart-wrenching. So I think that the blending of the personal and the professional kind of presents itself a little bit more strongly when it transfers into the crypto side these days.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Luke, if you want to kind of piggyback off of that and share a little bit about, what's your personal why, and then what you see as sort of the importance of the why for our industry to care.
Definitely. And just like Lauren was saying, that personal why, outside of, having children, and everyone has family members that, you worry about just for regular crime, right? Or just pickpocketing, little things like that you're worried about. But on a personal level, when you see this type of a heinous act, if it doesn't make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, and you don't feel a certain way about it, I think you gotta check your moral compass and understand whether or not you're a human being. I would say it's probably one of the most heinous acts out there. And I guess for many years now, I've been in law enforcement investigations and intelligence, and I've seen everything from, terrorism to financial crimes, to kidnappings, like adult kidnappings. But when you see this, even some of the, I would say, kind of training of kids to do certain things, in this space, when you're looking at, even some of these larger platforms such as, TikTok and some of these other, apps that are out there now where people are grooming these individuals. So it's very, I would say, the professional and the personal is kind of blended, because when you see these types of actions, you can see how it could be one of your family members or someone that you care about. And I've always been on the side of wanting to catch the bad guy. And to me, I think they're the top echelon of bad guys.
Thank you. We've covered a little bit of the why. And so I think it's important to kind of take a little bit of like a status update and talk about what we're doing as an industry. And this can be either from your own organizational experience, or even what you've seen some of your peers and others doing. What is it that we can do, either we are doing or we can do together, to try to combat some of the CSAM that we're seeing?
Well, if you're asking me, I think, more organizations such as like ATII itself, I think that public-private partnership needs to happen, and especially in this area, more than any other area. There's so much activity that can go on online, to me, in multiple different ways, multiple different platforms. And it's scary because you look at it and you can see that there are kids now that are 4 or 5 years old. Well, okay, maybe not 4 years old, but they're 5, 6 years old, and they have access to devices that we have never could dream we would have access to when we were children, right? And there are predators out there that are targeting them, and they're doing this purposely, knowing that this is an innocent child, an innocent, person here. And they're focusing, the reason I say they're the top echelon of criminals is because they understand that this is a child. This is someone that hasn't fully formed their thoughts, opinions on things. And for someone to target that innocence, to me, for their own gratification is you know it's a problem that we all should be standing up for, to say, hey, how do we stop this problem? How do we infiltrate it? And then, how do we disrupt it? And I guess to answer, the question on what else we should be doing, I think it takes a large community to come together and thwart things like this. And I do believe that more, I think we are seeing it. We are seeing some businesses come to the forefront and say, hey, we want to be out, we want to be out there on the front lines fighting this type of activity. And we just need more of it. And I hate to say the cliche kind of word, but in the government, the whole of government approach, this is something they should have, that whole of government approach for as well.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I was just going to piggyback on that and totally agree. I think that the public-private partnership is totally essential. And I think the organizational and financial institution or MSB related activity institutions, any of that sort of partnership is also essential. I know that we have participated at Kraken in multiple different projects and programs and exchanges and meetings and sessions with both organizations like this one, as well as with government, to be able to have that open discourse and say, okay, well, this is what we're seeing. What are you seeing? And then they can reciprocate and say the same, so that we can better our investigations. We can better train our investigators as to what red flags are really existing out there. We can sort of do additional research and proactive investigations on our side into emerging typologies and trends, so that we can better alert to these things, better interact with law enforcement. Having a strong response to law enforcement requests, where permitted and within the regulatory requirements, so we're not over exceeding those privacy concerns, but that we are meeting those requests and working with law enforcement as a partner to be able to address those concerns, I think is really essential and integral.
Can I hit on like almost two sides of the same coin, which is the public and the private sector side? We all agree that there needs to be greater cooperation. I might ask Luke to kind of take the public sector side and Lauren to take the private sector side. But, Luke, let's start with you. From the public sector side, agencies that would like to engage further with industry, what are some maybe early first steps or ways for them to begin to build that bridge between themselves and industry in order to combat CSAM?
Well, I think the worst thing you could do is wait until there's a problem to reach out. Everything it's more based on having that relationship and having that person that the public sector entity. So if it's someone that, an SSA and the FBI, DHS, any one of these public sector law enforcement entities that can reach out to, a business and say, hey, this is my, my area of responsibility. And what I want you to know is that I'm the person you should contact if you feel like there's something going on your platform. Or is it okay if I reach out to you as the agent or the analyst or whatever to discuss what we're seeing in briefings? I'll tell you, when I was at the Department of Justice, we would have what we call this cleared bankers meetings. And this was over the counterterrorism effort, so that we could understand what the banks were seeing in that effort. And then we would also brief the banks on what we're seeing. And this has become kind of sort of an area where I think this needs to go fairly quickly. And the reason I say that is because there's just an explosion of apps and things that kids can get on readily, like apps that are made specifically for kids. There are adults on there grooming them, trying to, target them. So there needs to be a way for, this interaction to happen. And I think that is the first thing for a public sector person that was I was in the public sector. Hey, I would reach out to these different entities, businesses, to let them know hey, this is my AOR. Love to talk to you, love to brief you. And you can't wait for the last second for you to have something happen and then say, okay, who do I talk to? Yeah, you're gonna eventually find it out, but you could be getting this information up front and all the information that you need in order to make sure this doesn't happen to someone else.
Yeah. And I would say, some of the best ways that I've worked with public sector have been helping to bring them into some of like the reg tech conferences, being able to sort of provide gentle public awareness of what they're doing and how and in what way they're open to inbound requests for engagement. All of that's crucially important, I think, building an environment of trust and cooperation in particular. So thank you. Lauren, I'm going to throw to you the opposite of that, and we'll focus a little bit on the private sector. So, what are some constructive first steps or next steps even that private sector can take as they work to maybe build that bridge between public and private sector? Because it has to go a little bit both ways.
100%. In my experience so far, what our larger engagement with the public sector have been invites to exactly what Luke was just talking about, those types of sessions in which government come together and we want to have an open exchange and discourse about a particular topic. We have not yet had one about CSAM, but we have about other high value related transactional activity and criminal activity that they're seeing across the board that present a huge risk to the financial institution, to the world safety, from drug trafficking related activity to scam related activity that cross the globe. So I agree. I think that if the invite is out there, that we are looking to participate. I think that what we could do from a private sector perspective is perhaps look to be the invitee rather than the invitor more often. It's harder to do especially from a fintech perspective, in which there is this ethos of privacy around your clients, and being a private sector, you're not at that same level of public engagement when it comes to law enforcement. We want to be assuring our clients as well as our employees that we're not law enforcement. You can't go ahead and do the same things that law enforcement does do. However, we want to be partners with law enforcement, especially those of us in compliance and in the FIUs and investigations and such. So I think finding better ways to open up that partnership from the private sector being the initiator is probably the next step in how you do it. I think your suggestion about bringing them into conferences is genius. Like, that's exactly what I would recommend, is the more engagement that we can have in reg tech or in fintech related space keeps us in our sort of happy zone and in the area in which we can build that trust and feel comfortable being able to show all the work that we're doing. I think one thing that gets, I don't know if ignored or not seen as much, is that those of us, especially, not those of us in private sector, all of us in the private sector, but those of us specifically who join compliance in the private sector are looking to protect people. We are looking to find the bad actors. We often come from law enforcement. I think at least, 40 to 60% of the people in my FIU all have law enforcement or public sector backgrounds. And so we are all looking to do exactly what Luke does on the back end and being able to truly protect us. We're looking to be able to report to it. And so we're not trying to find ways to let the fraud be swept under the rug or the bad actors. We're not looking to facilitate the bad actors' activity. We are looking for a way to stop it, to report it, to enforce it. And so I think the greater the engagement, the more we are able to fulfill that duty and that role.
Excellent. Thank you. I think, you both come from very established firms that are really kind of at the forefront of this, and you have an excellent background. Can you talk a little bit about how, firms that are just starting out on this path, what have been or what would be some resources that you could refer them to now, whether those be written materials or conferences or other? I think some of what we look at when we look at especially some of these emerging fast-moving issues is the fact that there needs to be a constant updating of skills. And likely as an organization grows, whether it's public sector and its remit is changing, shifting, and evolving in response to industry, or you're in industry and your space is evolving, shifting, and moving. How have you worked to either upgrade, upskill yourselves, and how have you worked to ensure that your teams are up to speed, focusing specifically on resources?
Yeah, I'll take that question. What we've done is look for organizations to partner with. So I think the first step is understanding that there there's a possibility that you have vulnerabilities that bad actors could exploit. And again, this is one of, like I said, that one of the upper echelons of bad guys. And so there are resources out there and entities that you can partner with. This is ATII, but there's others, and there's a lot of data and I think training that they can bring to your exact company, your enterprise, to keep you aware and abreast of the latest and greatest of use cases in this area. So I liken it to how, Lauren was talking earlier about, counterterrorism efforts and things like we constantly would train on what it looks like for someone to try to launder money to Hezbollah or an Al Qaeda, way back in the day, and all these things. And we would tell the banks, this is what we see and how we see it. Here are the actions of the perpetrators to do this. It's the same thing with this. Like you need to constantly be updated on this. You need to go out there to the organizations that, matter of fact, just have the expertise in it, so that you understand, those loopholes and the vulnerabilities that you know that you possibly have. And so I would say this, like you first have to have the want to go out and do this and seek it out, but then also train your employees on it. It's I think saying, hey, I didn't know, or this could happen or whatever, that's not a feasible answer anymore.
And Lauren?
Yeah, so from our end, I think in terms of external resources, there's a decent amount out there. Again, you do have to be proactive, like Luke said, you have to be willing to go look and to do the research. ACAMS has some really excellent resources out there. This this organization there's other anti-human trafficking organizations out there that you can get the research. What we have found within Kraken that we've done, and I think we do it successfully, and it's harder to do as a smaller entity, but as you grow, it becomes something that it's easier to focus on, and the earlier you can focus it on it, the better, I believe, is integrating with the proper vendors. So, we have more than one blockchain monitoring tool because we found that one didn't sufficiently cover the alerting spectrum that we were hoping to find. Adding a second one still didn't cover it to the degree that we were really hoping to. So we have a proactive investigations team that their job is to literally go out there and research the emerging trends and typologies that exist, and then figure out ways to better our investigations and create more fulsome coverage around the exposure that we have to CSAM markets, to darknet markets, to terrorism financing. And they'll focus on different aspects or different trends or typologies and really hone in on that one. When it came to CSAM, we recently conducted a deep dive into it by our proactive investigations team. And what they found was, by doing pretty extensive research on what our blockchain monitoring alerts look like, what the assets that were being utilized for those types of alerts and the limitations that those assets presented, how we can thereby expand our alerting processes to go outside of just the base information that we were finding. And what they found was that there are keywords that are utilized in withdrawals of Monero specifically, but of Monero transactions or Bitcoin transactions or anything. And we found a group of about 312 keywords that were represented in different court cases, in different federal government related documentation, in OSINT, at the sites themselves that were CSAM related. And if they're referenced within the withdrawal memo, that we can thereby tag that specific word to create an alert. And so I know that's kind of a roundabout way of saying you have to think outside of the box. How can you look to expand your ability to determine and identify, flag, alert, and report the exposure that your platform really has? And you do it through vendors. We have screening vendors that alert for individuals that have previous negative news associated to CSAM related activity or human trafficking or terrorism financing or whatever it is that they flag for, but with a sort of conflagration of blockchain monitoring, transaction monitoring, screening, and then this sort of proactive way of thinking of how can we find other ways to flag and alert activity has allowed us to find more on the platform and to try to be more proactive than it would be just to sit back and rely on everything that you're just given with our vendors.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that I think, again, talking about kind of like upskilling or upgrading systems, building to kind of meet some of an emerging or evolving field. One of the things that I always think is kind of useful is to talk about what your biggest lesson learned was in a lot of this. And I think that we've had some great examples that have, helped to pull to the forefront, like tangible, tactical ways of kind of stepping into this. But I think if you were to pick your one, and I'll give you up to 3 of your biggest lessons learned, only because I think sometimes when people who have had extensive experience in the space are speaking, it can sometimes be intimidating, especially for firms that are looking at first taking the steps into this and starting to engage with public sector or vice versa with private sector. I'll throw it kind of to Luke and put him on the spot a bit, but what has been some of your most important lessons learned? And I'll give you up to 3 if you can't narrow it down to 1.
Oh, wow. I would say for me, this is a totally different type of crime. I would put it, most criminal actions are done for, what's it say, crime of passion, monetary value, or I'm just, upset and very mad. When you are looking at this type of a crime, it's just so out of the wheelhouse of what normal investigators and people are thinking about. Some of the things that are just blatant in your face kind of shock you, so you have to go into this with an open mind, realizing that I could have investigated, terrorism cases, I could invest money laundering, all these things. You have no way of actually understanding the the true reason why someone would want to do this, right? And so you have to have a kind of like what Lauren was saying, you have to think outside of the box. It's not something that it's just, hey, here's a typology and you can follow it. Every one of them's different. So you have to kind of understand that you're not going to get it all the first week, the first month, whatever. You're going to have to reach out to people and build that baseline education understanding. Like Lauren was saying, like, okay, well, they found out that they would put specific words in there, right? Things you weren't even thinking about that mean specific, things to people who are in that type of community. So to me, it's more of a, so the big thing is it's an educational thing. You have to educate yourself on how this happens, and I wouldn't only say how it happens, but how does one get in contact? How does this communication happen between a buyer and a seller? How does this transaction happen? How, all of this is fairly different from any other crime. So the one big thing I would say is that I had to learn to educate myself on those specific cases, and none of them are the same. So it is as much as I want to say there's 2 or 3 other things, I would say the biggest thing is education on this aspect.
Excellent. Lauren, I'm going to pass it over to you just to kind of ask the same question, which is, we've talked a lot about, and thank you for giving such very, detailed and useful examples. But, if you can boil it down, like, what do you think your biggest lesson learned has been that could be helpful to the audience?
So I think I kind of have a personal one and then a professional one.
Right.
I think on the personal side, thinking back to like my terrorism studies days and when I was really researching how terrorist organizations move money and communicate with each other, you find that, or it was found through investigations probably by Luke and his compatriots within the government, that the manner of communication was in such a way to not be discovered. So it was utilizing things that you wouldn't normally think of as nefarious or bad, things like email drafts within the same email or chat rooms within a game, a video game that was online, and that's how the communications happened. And even though I knew that on my back end, it wasn't probably until my daughters, and you were talking about the ages of kids that are capable on technology, which blows my mind. I have a 3-year-old that completely knows how to use kids YouTube on my iPad. She has complete access. It blows me away what she's capable of. But my oldest was into a game called Roblox. I'm sure the audience is very familiar with it. I wasn't until she brought it to me. And the game is an online game where other people are on there. And I started watching her play, and then I realized, I was like, what's on the side there? And it was a chat function. And within that chat function are people going on. And my first concern was bullying, because I was seeing the way that kids were responding to her because she wasn't old enough to be able to type yet. So she didn't know how to respond back. But my second thought was, this could be anybody. I mean, these are people that are predators that would go onto a site like this and find a young kid, start talking with them, and then that is how they would hook them into conducting activity that would be for the worst, most, heinous reasons. And from a personal standpoint, it became, okay, we need to figure out how to utilize this aspect that we know this is how they're catching them, and we know that this is activity. And it's not in my worldview necessarily from a professional standpoint, because you don't go onto those types of games unless there are crypto related transactions that flow through those platforms. But it did feed into the professional side of things, where we don't, I think back to my last point was, don't rely specifically on the technology that you have. I mean, in the fintech world, we're big on automating everything. Reg tech is key and primary to focus for the development of your FIU. However, sometimes good old-fashioned investigation, education, research, digging into things that are outside of that technological alert that you get is what's really going to get you to being able to stop the bad actors. So I think that's how I marry those two things together.
Well, excellent. Thank you.
And I want to kind of piggyback on one thing there. And I guess another thing that I would say is that I've been shocked at the amount of investigations you have that start off in one area and they end up in this area. And I say that to say that like no one is like safe or immune from this. It's disgusting when you find someone that's high up in let's say a military organization or government organization or something, and you seize their laptops and computers for, let's say, maybe having classified material or something on it, and when you're going through that, you're seeing this type of material as well. So it's another thing where you can look at people in certain light and then understand that later on that, wow, this was something else that was going on as well. So I hate to to say you can't put it past anyone, but it's true. You can't. You just can't.
I think one of the questions that I like to do a lot of times with sessions like this is because we have sort of a status kind of update. We've talked a little bit about good practice. We've shared a bit about lessons learned. And you've kind of started to hit on this as well, which is where is all of this going? So I think, any insights you have either from a reg tech perspective or sort of an evolution of how government and private sector are evolving and where we can project some of the evolution of our ability, our tools, our processes and procedures to be able to better identify and mitigate this type of abuse material. What do you see as some of the trajectory of that? And maybe, Lauren, I'll kind of throw it to you to kind of give your perspective as sort of like looking ahead and towards the future. What do you see some of the evolution of the tools, policies, processes, procedures being?
I think that our tools have gotten better over in a very short period of time. Obviously, the industry is still fairly nascent in its form, and it's growing and maturing at rapid speed because of a necessity to do so. We have the regulatory pressure, we have the requirements around, and the sort of eye of the public eye, the focus of the public eye is on us. So I look to our blockchain monitoring tools and vendors out there to continue to better their understanding of these wallet addresses, of the exposure, of how the blockchain works, to be able to better identify interactions and exposure. I would imagine that as we continue to see a growth in this particular sector of bad actors, that perhaps we expand from just identifying direct exposure to expanding it out to indirect exposure and doing greater levels of network analysis. I know that looking at chain analysis in particular as a blockchain monitoring tool, the investigations and the manner of network analysis that's going into the training that they're conducting across the board for other FIUs and the nature of the investigations that we're being trained to conduct is getting better every year. And so I continue to hope and to see the expansion in that direction. I think from an internal processes and policies and procedures sort of standpoint, it goes back again to the training, the identification of red flags, the looking outside of the box, outside of those tools as to keeping abreast of what's going on. I think looking at a public-private partnership for just an informational purposes. I think in one of the exchanges we had a discussion is there a manner by which public sector and private sector can share information without risking the nature of a criminal investigation for the purpose of being able to take it to court later on, or providing information on a private sector investigation without violating our SAR reporting standards so that we don't disclose SARs when it's not necessary to do so, except through the official, SAR reporting. So we each have our disclosure requirements, but how do we work in a manner that can share information to a greater extent? Because we are typically reactive, and it's harder to be proactive without having a sort of heads up from those of you guys that are on the battlefield itself, so to speak, seeing that activity before it becomes public knowledge. So I would hope that we see more interaction on that level.
And Luke, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, I think Lauren's spot on with the public-private partnership, and you have to find a way to entice these entities to share this information in order to help with with something as bad as this, right? And so they do, I understand it in some cyber instances they have, safe harbor. That's something that they should look at to say, look, if Kraken is going to report on, hey, multiple entities they believe may, be doing this type of activity, then why try to, punish them for coming forward with information to help you go and get the bad actors? It's just ridiculous. So between that, and I do believe like the tools are really starting to catch on. There's a lot of AI going on out there now too. So I think you'll start seeing some of these tools being more robust around that area. And then one more thing is that I also want to say that I think you can't, I think in some instances you have entities that are part of the problem, I mean, part of the solution, but in some instances they're also part of the problem, and so you have to educate them and talk to them on the best ways to go about this, about stopping this type of activity on their networks.
Excellent. I just want to check in on time really quickly. Jennifer, if you can let us know what we have in terms of time remaining.
Yes, you have about 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Well, with that, I'd like to kind of start to wrap us up. So if we can maybe go around and talk a little bit about, anything that hasn't been mentioned to date or to point, I think it's kind of a great way to sort of round it out, sort of like any additional pieces that we haven't covered in our prior questions that you think are important. And, again, as we are all learning and growing together on this subject, just to make sure that some of those may be, lesser represented concepts, ideas, tools, policies, processes, procedures, that we have a chance to kind of give a little bit of voice to that. Because again, this is sort of a very emergent space. And to the degree that, we have maybe left something or a stone unturned as part of this conversation, I want to give a chance to our panelists on that.
I'm not sure of anything that we didn't necessarily touch on so much. I think what we have found from our investigations in this area is that it is definitely a confluence between the blockchain analytics that we have with our vendors that identify things and the external research, the online source information, the OSINT that we get. The more information that is out there, whether it be court cases, online sorts, or online sources that display the typologies, the direct websites in which they are housed and sold, industries and organizations like this one that put out information and research and papers to help us review and really identify typologies. I think more and more of that is necessary for us to really better and attack the program. Information, our technology is getting better, but as this really is a sort of newly identified space and it's becoming much more in the spotlight, it needs the research and the opportunity for us to be able to utilize information from the experts in the world would be very helpful for FIUs out there. So I would encourage all of the anti-human trafficking related organizations out there to start publishing papers. If the government has, information about certain typologies that they're seeing on a regular basis, publishing those informations from the DOJ reports to, FinCEN related reports, they're read by the FIUs, and it's very helpful for us to be able to identify those newly emerging trends. So I'm hoping that we get more of that out there as the industry grows, because our reg tech will follow, but our own individual knowledge is what really brings that forth in a more proactive investigation sphere.
Excellent, thank you.
Very true. Yeah, I agree with that. And I think, what you're hitting at in the heart there is the education of, of the masses to understand this is a serious issue. And I also think that there's also something here where you can start to look at in-house what you're using. Lauren said something very, very intriguing here where, I didn't have one transaction monitoring tool. I had to go get another one to, so there's things where you're going to need multiple influxes of data or just to sort out a problem. And you may not sort it out all the way. You're still going to have to rely on expertise from people from other fields. But I think it's definitely needed. And there's also, as well, like a different way to look at this problem as a whole and there's groups and there's entities out there that are doing this day in and day out. And so what you have today it may only catch 40% of the problem, but what you want to get as close as you can to 100%. And I think that's what everyone is striving for. I don't think there's one person out there that's like, hey, I just want to let, these type of transactions flow through and, it's fine by us. No one wants that, but it just takes a lot of effort for you to start looking at a new typology, new data, all these things to make sure that this isn't happening on your platforms. And I believe that, just one of the bigger things here is we need that education, and you need that partnership, that private-public partnership to work.
Well, thank you both for taking the time to speak with us today. As a strong supporter, as all of us are, of ATII, I just want to thank the organization for its leadership and being that connecting point between public and private sector. If you're not already a participant, a supporter, and one of the contributors to some of the amazing research and work they do, I strongly encourage you to do so. And with that, I'll go ahead and conclude our session. Thank you all for listening, and please have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.